Hello, everybody, and welcome back for our closer read of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, where we want to comment and criticize this approach. We want to talk today really about the Lobster chapter, and I found this picture here on the internet. Gotcha, a famous phrase that he said, I believe, in an interview with Kathy Wood. But that's really not what we want to focus on. We want to ask, okay, what is it about these lobsters? And I think from our reading of and I should have looked it up, from the Overture, Overture, the first chapter that came before Rule 1, we know that Jordan Peterson believes that being is mostly about hierarchies. And in this chapter, he will actually explain these hierarchies with regard to his famous lobsters. So let's listen very briefly what he says. I found here a video, I will link it in the description, where they actually put some pictures on it. And let's listen very briefly to it.
With human society, it's more like hierarchies of competence and dominance per se. Lobsters have hierarchies. That's 1/3 of a billion years ago. Okay, that's not a social construction. It's part of being itself. And if you only see a hierarchy as power and tyranny, then you're looking at the world wrong.
Okay, so what he says here, and we use the graphic a little bit, right? So he says, okay, part of being means to have hierarchies. By the way, that's also something that Nietzsche says in the genealogy of morals. And in fact, he sounds in many parts very much inspired by some passages of Nietzsche. I don't want to say he sounds like Nietzsche. I feel like Nietzsche writes more deep-minded essays. But this is certainly a Nietzschean thought that we have hierarchies. But I think Nietzsche thinks about them in a way different way. And he comes up with a certain kind of master's morality, which people often misunderstand. They think master's morality is necessarily a morality of oppression or something, which is not true. It's actually a morality of compassion. And it comes from the acknowledgement that someone has strength. You find these elements in Peterson too, but not carved out as clearly and philosophically well thought as in Nietzsche. So if you want to read something, I definitely recommend Nietzsche over Peterson. And why? Maybe we look into the chapter right now in order to see why I think it that way. So, okay, we have here rule number 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. I should actually do that, being a lobster, right? And he starts right now with the first sentence. If you are like most people, you don't often think about lobsters. And that's true. I don't think much about lobsters, and I wonder if that example can really help us. So let's look into the example. Okay, he explains very briefly the problem. Lobsters live on the ocean floor, and what happens if there's more than one lobster and they compete for the same area. Then they actually have to think about what they do, and probably they have to somehow engage in aggressive behavior. And he claims that, for example, when the birds sing songs that sound to our ears peacefully and beautiful, it's actually the cry of domination. And it reminds me of a quote of Werner Herzog, who says, well, maybe the birds don't sing beautiful songs, but they just cry in agony. And yeah, maybe beauty that we find in nature, just the icing on something that is really horrible. It just sells us something that is horrible and makes maybe human existence more bearable. So this is a very pessimistic outlook here. And so what he says now, okay, let's look at nature, and we basically see real problems of competition. And I don't dive into this much deeper because it's quite clear what kind of picture he wants to present to us. Nature is not the beautiful place that some, let's say, hippies try to sell us. It's not just a peaceful living. It's bloody hell, right? Okay, my impersonation got worse. So, and yeah, he says, however, like, okay, why don't we just have like fight all the time in our culture? Because fights come with costs. And if you engage in fights permanently, and that's true also for lobsters, you actually get wounded, you lose strength, and then maybe a third lobster comes around the corner and just beats the hell out of you. So the third party will be very happy, and therefore we have a lot of compensating mechanisms in our society that, however, all engage in the same dominating power hierarchy. And this is a very interesting thought because he does not consider the possibility of beauty or a nice life existing for itself. It seems everything is understood in this hierarchy where people are competing. And if we have cooperation, it's not cooperation for its own sake. It's just cooperation for gaining advantages in that kind of hierarchy. Please correct me if I see that wrong, but this is how I read this chapter, and we will find more examples for that. So now he actually gives us his view on the evolution, how these things came to be. So over the millennia, animals who must cohabit with others in the same territories have in consequence learned many tricks to establish dominance while risking the least amount of damage. So that's just what I said, right? And we find the same for lobsters. They're scuttling around on the ocean floor are no exception. If you catch a few dozen and transport them to a new location, you can observe their status-forming rituals and techniques. Each lobster will first begin to explore the new territory, partly to map its details and partly to find a good place for shelter. Lobsters learn a lot about where they live, and they remember what they learn. If you startle one near its nest, it will quickly zip back and hide there. If you startle some distance away, however, it will immediately dart towards the nearest suitable shelter, previously identified and now remembered. So now, because these places are scarce, they have actually, by evolution, complex defensive and aggressive behaviors built right into their nervous system. And he makes this argument to see, look, this is a mechanism that is 350 million years old, and it also exists in you. So now what they do, they engage in dominance behavior, but they don't necessarily kill each other. They fight with each other, and when one competitor realizes that the other lobster is too strong, and he does not see that before just because the lobster is bigger, then there's a certain ritual that follows. A vanquished competitor loses confidence sometimes for days. Sometimes the defeat can have even more severe consequences. If a dominant lobster is badly defeated, its brain basically dissolves. Then it grows a new subordinate brain, one more appropriate to its new lowly position. Its original brain just isn't sophisticated to manage the transformation from king to bottom dog without virtually complete dissolution and regrowth. Anyone who has experienced a painful transformation after a serious defeat in romance or career may feel same sense of kinship with the once successful crustacean. Okay, so this is a bit interesting here. I think what he wants to do, like he compares lobsters with human beings. And in a sense, he says, look, our societies are not more complex. They are very similar. You have the same behaviors built into your brain. And once you're defeated, you will feel the same as the lobster. And what he wants to do is he wants to give us a recipe to actually move up in the hierarchy. So this is no social criticism. This is just a book that tells you how you move in a natural world order of being. And that's the truth to him. There's no social criticism. These societies cannot be changed. And he said the distribution of top dogs and losers is found all over the planet. And what you have to secure is that you are not a loser. It's interesting that he often argues against ideology, especially ideologies of the leftists, but it seems he never wonders or asks himself whether he himself follows an ideology. And this here is something I would simply call naturalism. And I wonder if we can transfer the example of a lobster to human society. If we did that, I would even say it sounds a bit unscientific. I don't like to say that so much, right? Because I don't like to accuse others being unscientific, but I feel like there are more argumentative steps necessary to say that basically our society is a lobster hierarchy. I think we should not make that quickly that comparison. It may work on a level of popular people who then say, oh, yeah, it's eating and being eaten. Yeah, that's what everything is about. Yeah, sure. But what about all the modes of cooperation that we have established in our society? All these games that we, for example, play, are they always just about domination? Is everything we do about domination? And moreover, what I also ask, like he talks here about male lobsters. What's the women's role? What's the women's role in the domination game? Just being completely dominated? I mean, the top dogs dominate the low dogs, right? What role do women fulfill? They're like the female lobster is not becoming a male lobster. So I guess in our society, a female human lobster can never become a male lobster, right? That's a kind of natural necessity here that he proclaims. Then what do women do? What is their meaning in life if their life is not about rising in the hierarchy? It seems they have no meaning of life, because he just offers that the meaning of life is suffering in order to climb the ladder. Or is what women do just like to attach to the major lobster, to the top dog lobster? And then why does the top dog lobster want that kind of woman? That kind of woman. So it seems there are a lot of questions that come with this, the deeper you dive into this, right? And it's not that I'm saying it's simply false. I don't want to say this is simply false, but I think it's not free in any way from an ideology. And I think this ideology is called naturalism. Yeah, in saying this, I just want to look very briefly into the Stanford Encyclopedia, which is probably the best internet address if you want to look up philosophical conventions, terms, and so on. And we see here, okay, what is naturalism? It is like, okay, these philosophers have a certain affinity to something that is called science. So very often they are also related to something that is called scientism, yeah. And they urge that reality is exhausted by nature, containing nothing supernatural, and that the scientific method should be used to investigate all areas of reality, including the human spirit. So I don't have so much something against naturalism. So maybe we say Peterson is a kind of branch of naturalism that especially goes into a certain direction of social Darwinism. I mean, he wants to say that hierarchy is not necessarily bad, and that he doesn't want to go into a direction of a authoritarianism. He doesn't want to go to these brute ideologies of, let's say, the neo-Nazis on the other hand. So it's a bit unclear how he wants to prevent that. I think he wants to establish the individual, but the individual, on the other hand, is just one that is competing. On the other hand, he also includes religious symbols, right, that somehow express something about the meaning of life. So if he includes spirituality in his model, then I wonder, why does he focus so strongly on lobsters, right? So it's a bit incorrect to call Jordan B. Peterson a naturalist. Naturalist is just that you reject supernatural entities for explanation. It's maybe better to say that he is a Darwinist reductionist who thinks that the cycles that we observe in the animal kingdom are representative for what we also observe between human beings. And I think this is a big leap. Now, the discussion, however, is more difficult, why that is a big leap. But a basic course on sociology should tell us why. There are elements of free decision, of cooperation, of social interactions that can, for example, not simply be explained by simple instincts, right? And it's a bit weird to say that, for example, Newton wrote his Principles Mathematica because he wanted to establish dominance. Okay, so he goes on with now explaining how the chemistry works and how this chemistry is also working in us, and that basically the serotonin helps to regulate postural flexion. The flexed lobster extends its appendages so that it can look tall and dangerous, and he has a very good metaphor to express this here. They look like Clint Eastwood in a spaghetti western. Okay, thanks for this comparison. Now, he's just saying that to express, okay, straight up, and you actually have an influence on your serotonin levels, and you actually change something about your life. So this is the first step. I don't think the rule itself is bogus. It's just the underlying ideology that I find a bit problematic. Another question, however, that I have is also, what happens if everyone runs suddenly around like a lobster? Right? What happens? Like if you have in a society, and I would say that's a game theory problem, right? If everyone engages like in more aggressive behavior, the simple fact that you start managing it won't help you anymore because now everybody does it. And I think societies are self-reflective systems, right? It's not like, so the lobsters, they don't say, oh, no, I display more aggressive behavior. If you do that, you may have more chances as lobsters, but lobsters just don't reflect on themselves. So there we see that as a natural fact, right? If all humans read like Jordan Peterson's book, then and all follow these methods, then obviously these methods would not work anymore because everyone does that, and then you have to do something different. And so I think this is what we shouldn't forget if we talk about human beings, that they actually adapt to other human beings' behaviors. And I think that our societies have, in that regard, already developed complex mechanisms to deal with lobsters that just play lobsters, but that just have a big mouth, but no competence behind. Can make you more successful once in a while, but not necessarily. And maybe there are also other successful strategies than just being a now serotonin, testosterone manipulated human being. Nevertheless, now he comes here with Pareto distributions and all of that. He says, okay, it's a winner take all in the lobster world, just in the human societies where the top 1% have as much loot as the bottom 50%. Now, I wonder if I can, no, I cannot easily look up these footnotes. But the thing is, that's a bit weird, right? So do societies have to be this way? By what way do we measure that? Pareto distributions, that's a big discussion. But like, for example, there are societies that have a way larger middle class, and there are societies that have a smaller middle class. So I don't think the Pareto distribution simply works. And he says, and where the richest 85 people have as much as the bottom 3.5 billion. So yeah, you look basically for distributions where that works, but probably you can also look for sub-distributions where that does not work and you still have good societies, right? Do I have an example? No, I don't have an example, but I mean, the city where I'm from, we didn't have super rich people. We're still a good city, right? Or if we have ancient tribe cultures, right? We don't have these distributions of money. to be there? Or would we say, well, in a village of 100 people, there are 15 people who, well, okay, maybe. But it seems to me rather a descriptive phenomenon that does not have to be that way. So I think it can be manipulated by human society. But I guess Jordan Peterson would say, well, but then you go against nature. Would you want that? Yeah, maybe we want that. So that's the question, right? Do we have to accept nature as dominating the way of how we live? Is the status quo the way the world has to be? And I think that's what Peterson says all the time. And yeah, for example, I also highly doubt this example. Similarly, just 4 classical composers wrote almost all the music played by modern orchestras. Like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and Tchaikovsky. I heard that just with Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, maybe because I'm a German. So, but Tchaikovsky, like, is that still played? Yeah. Have I ever been to a Tchaikovsky concerto in Germany? No. I mean, I know Tchaikovsky. I guess, yeah, I have, of course, I have been to the first piano concerto. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know, like I have to look a little bit more in Wilfredo Pareto what that means, but I highly doubt that this is the way, right? The mass of heavenly bodies, a very small number hold all the matter. Well, okay, well, if that is for the heavenly bodies this way, I mean, we all have studied our ancient philosophy, right? Then it must also be for human beings. As for example, Galileo observed, a cat has 7 holes, so therefore there can also be just 7 planets. Okay, and so then he says here also interestingly, the frequency of words in a language, 90% of communication occurs using just 500 words. I was like, yeah, but I mean, with these 500 words, you can actually not do very much. You really, like, even if you take the first 1,000 words, your communication will fail in many, many cases. So, like, I wonder what a Pareto distribution in this regard even tells us. Just means like some words are more often used than others. So what that means that rich people are justified? I think these examples, I mean, it explains the Pareto distribution, that it's a principle that occurs in nature, right? But that doesn't, like, so yeah, a lion eats another lower animal. Therefore, human beings, when they're strong, can eat lower human beings. I don't know. Or let's say a lion kills a lion that is lower in the social order. Therefore, we can kill human beings in this that are lower in the social order. So I wonder, like, so he has to explain a little bit more how he thinks that the principles of nature are exemplified in human culture. Yeah. So, and he says the resultant hierarchy is exceedingly stable. A weak lobster will quit trying, accept his lowly status, and keep his legs attached to his body. And the strong lobster will get all the girls. It's also interesting. Probably we have now to say, well, yeah, and that's the whole life purpose of women, right? To get the top lobster. So yeah, and because it's for a lobster way more successful if or worthwhile to be successful if there are lobsters in male. Therefore, we have these hierarchies established, and then he says dominance hierarchies have been an essentially permanent feature of the environment to which all complex life has adapted. So, and I really wonder, like, what is your position like on this? Is dominance hierarchy, a dominance hierarchy, is that the major feature of our society? I mean, he says, okay, it's based on competence, right? And yeah, I mean, that's what we usually call now a meritocracy, right? We didn't have this meritocracy before. Yeah, but I'm skeptical. I'm very skeptical here. And it was helpful to read this together, to criticize this text together, and to look like for the basic elements from which he constructs his position. I think it's interesting to read Jordan Peterson, but I mean, his book is basically the way he speaks. If he speaks, it is an incredibly gifted, or he's an incredibly gifted rhetorician. But his texts, in my mind, don't dive deeper into the issues that I want to know more about. I would like, of course, know about the order of being, but something is very hesitant in me to just accept that being is just composed from dominance hierarchies, from differences, right? And something is also very hesitant in me to accept that the order of our society is just a reflection of an underlying mechanism of being that is also shown in nature. What about, for example, emergent properties? What about sociology? Like all of these disciplines that deal with phenomena that, according to their discipline, cannot just simply explained through nature. I mean, obviously, Jordan Peterson would say something like, well, sociology is a useless subject because in the end, it's all biology and nature. And you will meet a lot of people in life who make these claims, but yeah, and it's hard to, like, to be honest, it's hard to immediately react to that. It's like when you meet somebody in logic and they say something like, oh, but that violates the principle of contradiction or something, which is possible to be violated in a certain sense according to Priest. And then you say, well, the principle of contradiction is not always necessary. And then they demand an explanation, but then you are confronted with a large body of philosophical arguments where you cannot just pull out one example for why that is. And most of the simple examples, for example, when you step with your foot into a door, are you inside or outside of the house? Isn't there a third possibility? I think these simple examples have shortcomings because we say, well, but that's not logical. That's just a question of what you define as the inside or the outside of the house. There are different ways of dealing with that. Or if you take, like, for example, the quantum idea that something is a wave and a particle at the same time, then people say, well, but that's not a contradiction because mathematically it makes sense. So the principle of non-contradiction not being true is a way more complex theory that involves way more arguments. And I feel this is the same when somebody presents a very simple theory about how the world is. Like, how are you going to react to that? And I think that Jordan Peterson, in our growing world of complexity, is a great simplifier. And that makes his rhetorical style so appealing because he gives people orientation with regard to simple standards. But I think it's more important that we follow something like a path of, let's call it, truth. And then in that sense, the truth may be not a simple phrase, a simple rule that you can practice in life. The truth may be that life is confusing, maybe meaningless, not only suffering, and that we cannot understand how to deal with our life. That's a very pessimistic view. Actually, I don't share that so much. But let's maybe say it more like that. Maybe the truth may also be that life is a riddle in itself that cannot be solved, and that's what it makes worth it. So yeah, if you like these little reflections on Jordan Peterson, then please give it a like and subscribe. You don't have to, but I would be happy. As I said, this video here is not intended to be commercial, so I just do that to share some knowledge and hopefully to get some interesting contacts with people that I can work together with. Bye bye.